The cruelest promises are the ones you sign believing your heart will never survive them. Emma Carter held the elegant silver pen with trembling fingers as the royal marriage contract rested before her on a polished oak table inside the Moon Council chamber. Beyond the towering windows, snow-covered mountains surrounded Ashford Kingdom beneath the pale glow of an enormous full moon, while rows of white marble pillars stretched toward a vaulted ceiling painted with ancient wolves running across the night sky. At 23 years old, Emma had never imagined her future would be decided by a single signature. She had grown up as an Omega in a quiet mountain village where whispers followed her everywhere she walked. Some called her too gentle. Others believed fate had forgotten her entirely. Yet none of those voices hurt as much as the silence that filled the chamber now. Across the table stood Alpha King Rowan Ashford, the most powerful ruler in the Northern Territories. Tall, composed, and dressed in a perfectly tailored black ceremonial suit embroidered with silver wolf crests, he remained almost motionless, his calm gray eyes impossible to read. He neither encouraged nor discouraged her decision. It was as though he believed the choice belonged entirely to her. Emma lowered her gaze to the parchment. Every line had been written in graceful ink, promising protection for her family, security for her village, and peace between neighboring pacts in exchange for one thing alone, her hand in marriage. Love was never mentioned. Happiness was never guaranteed. She quietly wondered whether either had ever existed inside royal marriages. The elderly royal scribe cleared his throat, patiently waiting. Around the chamber, council members watched with careful expressions that revealed curiosity more than warmth. To them she was only an ordinary Omega unexpectedly chosen for reasons no one seemed willing to explain. Emma thought of her aging grandmother waiting at home, of the weathered cottage standing against harsh winter winds, of the neighbors whose harvest had failed again this season. If she walked away now, countless lives would continue carrying burdens they could no longer bear. Slowly, she signed her name. The final stroke of ink settled across the page, and for one quiet heartbeat nothing happened. Then the silver border surrounding the contract shimmered almost imperceptibly. Tiny threads of pale moonlight flowed across the parchment before disappearing beneath the elegant signatures as though the paper itself had taken a silent breath. Several council members exchanged uncertain glances. The royal scribe frowned before quickly pretending he had seen nothing. Emma looked up, believing she had imagined it, but Rowan's eyes had narrowed ever so slightly toward the contract. He had noticed it too. Neither of them spoke. The chamber remained perfectly still except for the distant sound of winter wind brushing against stained glass windows. Rowan finally stepped forward, not with arrogance, but with quiet dignity. He accepted the contract with steady hands before offering Emma a respectful nod instead of a royal command. "Thank you," he said softly, his voice carrying unexpected warmth. It was the first genuine kindness anyone had offered her since she entered the palace. The words lingered inside her far longer than they should have. As attendants prepared to escort her toward the royal residence where tomorrow's wedding ceremony would take place, Emma glanced back one final time at the contract resting in Rowan's hands. For the briefest instant, the faded symbol embossed beneath the royal seal glowed once more like a hidden crescent moon awakening after centuries of sleep. She blinked, and it vanished. No one else reacted. Yet somewhere deep within the ancient palace walls, an unseen door quietly unlocked, as though destiny itself had been waiting for the exact moment Emma Carter believed she had signed away her future, when in truth she had unknowingly opened the first page of a story written long before either of them had ever been born. Emma expected the journey to the royal palace to feel like the beginning of a sentence, yet it felt strangely like walking into the last chapter of someone else's story. Before sunrise, a magnificent black carriage adorned with silver wolf emblems arrived outside the modest cottage where she had spent her entire life. Frost covered the wooden fence, and thin curls of smoke drifted from neighboring chimneys as curious villagers gathered silently along the narrow road. Some offered sympathetic smiles, while others whispered behind gloved hands, convinced that no ordinary Omega could ever belong beside the Alpha King. Emma hugged her grandmother one final time, promising she would return someday no matter what the future held. The elderly woman slipped a small silver ribbon into Emma's hand and smiled with quiet confidence. "The moon never loses what truly belongs beneath its light," she whispered. Emma tucked the ribbon into the sleeve of her simple traveling cloak without fully understanding the words. The carriage rolled north through snow-covered forests, frozen rivers, and towering mountain passes until Ashford Palace appeared beyond the morning mist. The palace was unlike anything Emma had imagined. White stone towers rose toward the clouds, elegant bridges connected enormous halls, and banners carrying the royal wolf crest fluttered gracefully in the cold wind. Crystal fountains reflected the pale winter sunlight while rows of evergreen trees lined the entrance courtyard with perfect symmetry. Everything appeared magnificent, yet strangely silent. As soon as the carriage doors opened, dozens of servants and royal attendants stood waiting. Their movements were flawless, but many could not hide their curiosity as their eyes quietly studied the young Omega stepping onto polished marble for the very first time. Emma straightened her shoulders, refusing to allow nervousness to overcome her dignity. She remembered every promise she had made before leaving home. A dignified woman wearing deep blue ceremonial robes introduced herself as Lady Eleanor, the palace steward responsible for preparing the future queen. Although polite, her expression remained carefully reserved. She escorted Emma through endless corridors decorated with towering paintings of former Alpha Kings, stained glass windows portraying ancient moon ceremonies, and elegant chandeliers whose crystal lights shimmered across marble floors. Everywhere Emma looked, portraits displayed powerful rulers standing proudly beside graceful Lunas whose confident smiles seemed almost impossible to imitate. She quietly wondered if any of them had once entered these halls carrying fear instead of certainty. Later that afternoon, Lady Eleanor presented Emma with an ivory ceremonial gown embroidered with delicate silver thread. While attendants carefully adjusted the dress, faint conversations drifted through the doorway. Some questioned why the Alpha King had selected an unknown Omega. Others predicted the marriage would remain a formal alliance with little affection. Emma lowered her eyes, pretending not to hear, although every whispered doubt settled heavily inside her heart. As evening approached, she was invited to the palace library to review the customs she would follow during tomorrow's ceremony. Towering shelves filled with ancient books surrounded the quiet chamber, where an elderly librarian smiled warmly the moment Emma entered. Unlike everyone else, the old woman looked at her with unmistakable recognition rather than curiosity. Before Emma could ask why, the librarian gently reached for a weathered volume resting alone upon a carved wooden pedestal. The moment Emma's fingertips brushed its worn leather cover, the pages turned by themselves until they stopped beneath an illustration of a glowing crescent moon identical to the hidden symbol she had seen upon the marriage contract. A faint silver light flickered across the page before disappearing just as footsteps echoed beyond the library entrance. Emma slowly lifted her eyes toward the doorway, where Alpha King Rowan stood quietly watching, his calm expression revealing nothing, yet somehow making it impossible for her to believe that any of what had just happened was merely coincidence. Emma remained frozen for a brief moment as Rowan stood quietly beneath the carved stone archway of the library, his presence commanding attention without demanding it. Neither of them spoke. The ancient book resting beneath her fingertips had already become still again, its mysterious silver glow disappearing as though it had never existed. Lady Miriam, the elderly librarian, gently closed the weathered volume and offered the Alpha King a respectful bow before excusing herself without explanation. Emma suddenly realized they were alone among thousands of forgotten books whose leather bindings carried centuries of stories. Rowan slowly approached the carved pedestal, his polished black ceremonial coat reflecting the warm light of countless candles placed along towering shelves. His expression remained composed, yet there was unmistakable curiosity in his calm gray eyes. He glanced briefly toward the closed book before looking back at Emma. "Has anyone ever told you that this library rarely welcomes strangers?" he asked quietly. Emma hesitated before answering honestly. "No, Your Majesty. I only came here because I was asked to study tomorrow's ceremony." Rowan looked around the silent chamber as though listening to something hidden beneath the stillness. "The oldest books in this palace have unusual ways of recognizing certain visitors," he replied. Most people can spend their entire lives here without witnessing anything remarkable. Emma considered telling him about the glowing crescent moon upon the page, but something inside her urged patience. She simply nodded, unsure whether he already knew exactly what had happened. Together they walked through the endless aisles lined with ancient manuscripts describing forgotten kingdoms, moon rituals, and the long history of Ashford Palace. Every few moments Emma noticed paintings portraying alpha kings beside graceful lunas whose faces carried an unusual serenity. One portrait in particular captured her attention. The woman standing beside an ancient ruler looked astonishingly familiar. Her soft features, light eyes, and gentle smile resembled Emma so closely that she instinctively stepped nearer. Beneath the frame rested a faded bronze plaque whose letters had almost disappeared with time. Before Emma could read them clearly, Rowan quietly spoke. "That portrait has puzzled scholars for generations." She turned toward him in surprise. "Do you know who she was?" Rowan slowly shook his head. "Only fragments remain. Records say she vanished shortly after becoming Luna, and much of her story disappeared with her." His answer felt sincere, yet Emma sensed there was more he chose not to reveal. Evening shadows gradually stretched across the palace as bells echoed through distant corridors announcing preparations for the royal wedding. Lady Eleanor soon arrived to escort Emma toward the ceremonial residence reserved for future queens. The suite overlooked snow-covered gardens where moonlight shimmered across frozen fountains and carefully trimmed hedges shaped like wolves. Everything inside the chambers reflected quiet elegance rather than overwhelming luxury. Fresh white flowers rested upon polished tables, silver candles filled the room with gentle warmth, and delicate curtains moved softly with the winter breeze flowing through slightly opened windows. After the attendants finished arranging the ceremonial gown for the morning, Emma finally found herself alone. She removed the small silver ribbon her grandmother had given her and carefully placed it beside the window. As moonlight touched the ribbon, its woven threads reflected a faint silver glow almost identical to the mysterious symbol from the marriage contract and the ancient book. Curious, Emma reached toward it, but before her fingers made contact, a gentle knock interrupted the silence. Outside her chamber door stood a young palace messenger carrying a sealed envelope marked with the royal crest. Inside rested a single handwritten note in elegant script. "Meet me in the eastern garden before sunrise. There is something you deserve to see before the ceremony begins." There was no signature, yet Emma recognized the careful handwriting from the documents she had signed only yesterday. She lifted her eyes toward the moon shining above Ashford Palace, sensing that whatever awaited her before dawn would change far more than tomorrow's wedding, because for the first time since arriving, she no longer felt like someone who had wandered into another person's destiny. Instead, destiny itself seemed to be quietly walking toward her. Emma barely slept. Long before the first hint of dawn reached the snow-covered mountains surrounding Ashford Palace, she wrapped a warm ivory cloak around her ceremonial dress and quietly slipped through the silent corridors, carrying only the handwritten note folded safely inside her sleeve. The palace seemed completely different before sunrise. The grand halls that had felt intimidating during the day now rested beneath gentle moonlight pouring through enormous stained glass windows, painting silver patterns across polished marble floors. Every footstep echoed softly, as though the ancient walls themselves were listening. Guided only by small lanterns mounted along stone archways, Emma followed signs leading toward the eastern garden. When she stepped outside, crisp winter air greeted her with a refreshing calm. Snow rested delicately upon neatly trimmed hedges, while elegant fountains stood frozen beneath a sky slowly changing from deep blue to pale violet. In the center of the garden stood Rowan beside a quiet reflecting pool where the full moon shimmered upon perfectly still water. He turned as Emma approached, offering the same respectful nod that had surprised her since the day they met. "Thank you for trusting the note," he said gently. Emma smiled faintly. "I was not certain whether I should come." Rowan looked toward the peaceful garden before answering. "Neither was I when I wrote it." For a few quiet moments, neither of them spoke. The silence did not feel uncomfortable. Instead, it carried the peaceful rhythm of two strangers slowly discovering they shared more questions than answers. Rowan finally began walking along a narrow stone path lined with white moonflowers that somehow remained in bloom despite the winter frost. Emma followed beside him. "Most people believe this marriage exists only because of politics," Rowan said. "Some believe it protects alliances. Others think it strengthens the kingdom. Those explanations are convenient, but they are not the complete truth." Emma looked toward him with quiet curiosity. "Then why did you choose me?" Rowan stopped beside an ancient stone monument carved with wolves circling a crescent moon. His calm expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Because I did not choose you." Emma frowned slightly, uncertain whether she had misunderstood. Rowan rested one hand upon the weathered monument. "Long before either of us was born, the royal family protected a promise that appears only once in many generations. I spent years believing it was only a legend." Before he could continue, a warm silver glow slowly spread across the carved stone beneath his fingertips. At the same moment, Emma felt gentle warmth beneath the sleeve covering her left wrist. She carefully pulled back the fabric and stared in astonishment. A delicate crescent-shaped symbol shimmered faintly against her skin before gradually fading once more. Rowan looked equally surprised. "It has never appeared this early," he whispered almost to himself. Emma instinctively reached toward the monument, and the instant her fingertips brushed the ancient stone, a hidden doorway silently opened behind it. Cool air drifted outward from a narrow passage concealed within the palace gardens, carrying the scent of old parchment and cedar wood. Neither of them had touched anything except the monument itself. Rowan slowly turned toward Emma, genuine astonishment replacing his usual composed expression. "That passage has remained sealed for over 300 years, he said quietly. Together they stepped inside, where hundreds of crystal lanterns resting upon carved shelves suddenly illuminated one after another without anyone lighting them. At the far end of the hidden chamber stood a life-sized marble statue of a Luna wearing robes remarkably similar to Emma's ceremonial gown. Around the statue's neck rested a silver pendant shaped like a crescent moon. As Emma drew closer, the pendant released a soft silver glow that filled the chamber with quiet warmth, and beneath the statue, ancient words slowly appeared across the stone pedestal as though awakened after centuries of silence. Emma could not understand the forgotten language, but Rowan's expression changed completely as he read every glowing symbol in absolute silence, realizing that the ancient promise he had spent his life doubting had just begun unfolding before his own eyes. The hidden chamber remained perfectly silent except for the gentle hum of silver light surrounding the ancient pendant. Emma stood motionless before the marble statue, unable to explain why the unfamiliar place felt strangely welcoming, as though every stone had been patiently waiting for her arrival. Rowan slowly approached the pedestal, carefully reading each glowing line that had appeared across its weathered surface. His calm expression grew more thoughtful with every passing second. Finally, he looked toward Emma with a mixture of wonder and uncertainty. "These words speak of the first Luna," he said quietly. "According to the oldest legends, she was not chosen by the kingdom. The kingdom was transformed because it recognized her." Emma lowered her eyes toward the silver crescent resting around the statue's neck. "I do not understand why any of this is happening to me." Rowan answered honestly. "Neither do I. Everything I believed about our history suddenly feels incomplete." As if responding to their conversation, the crescent pendant gently lifted from the statue without anyone touching it. It floated gracefully through the still air before stopping in front of Emma. She hesitated, glancing toward Rowan for reassurance. He simply nodded, allowing her to make the decision herself. With slow, careful movements, Emma accepted the pendant into her hands. The silver felt unexpectedly warm, almost like sunlight resting against her palms despite the cool air inside the chamber. The moment she placed the necklace around her neck, a soft wave of pale light flowed across the room. Crystal lanterns shimmered brighter, ancient carvings hidden within the walls became visible, and faded murals revealed graceful scenes of Alpha Kings standing beside Lunas beneath glowing full moons. None of the paintings depicted conquest or power. Instead, they portrayed trust, compassion, and quiet partnership. Emma noticed that every Luna wore the same crescent pendant now resting against her own heart. Before either of them could speak again, hurried footsteps echoed through the narrow passage leading into the chamber. Lady Eleanor appeared first, followed closely by several members of the royal council whose expressions reflected equal parts surprise and concern. The elderly librarian, Lady Miriam, quietly joined them, her gentle smile suggesting she had expected this discovery long before anyone else. One of the senior council members looked immediately toward the glowing pendant around Emma's neck before exchanging uneasy glances with the others. "Your Majesty," he began respectfully, "the wedding ceremony must begin within the hour. The council strongly advises that this chamber remain sealed until a formal investigation can be completed." Rowan remained remarkably composed. "Nothing here threatens the kingdom," he replied. "On the contrary, it may finally explain truths our ancestors intended us to remember." The council members did not argue openly, but Emma could feel their hesitation filling the room like an approaching winter storm. As everyone quietly returned toward the palace, whispers followed behind them through every marble corridor. Servants glanced discreetly toward the glowing pendant before lowering their eyes. Noble families waiting for the ceremony noticed the unusual attention surrounding the future queen, and quiet conversation spread rapidly across the grand halls. Emma sensed uncertainty everywhere she looked, yet she no longer felt the loneliness that had accompanied her arrival. Something within her had begun changing, not through sudden confidence, but through a quiet certainty she could not explain. When Lady Eleanor finally escorted her into the royal bridal chamber, the magnificent ivory gown waited beside the window exactly as it had the night before. Yet now, delicate silver threads woven throughout the fabric shimmered with the same gentle light as the pendant. Emma touched the embroidered sleeve in astonishment. The gown had not looked this way yesterday. Before she could speak, Lady Miriam entered carrying a small wooden box carved with ancient crescent symbols. She carefully opened the lid, revealing an elegant silver crown unlike any royal ornament Emma had seen. The elderly librarian smiled softly and whispered, "This crown has belonged to no one for 3 centuries. This morning, it unlocked itself." The grand bells of Ashford Palace echoed across the kingdom as morning sunlight spilled through towering stained glass windows, filling the royal hall with ribbons of gold and silver that danced across polished marble floors. Nobles from every allied pack gathered beneath magnificent stone arches, their elegant ceremonial clothing creating a sea of rich colors that contrasted with the bright winter light pouring through the palace. Emma stood quietly inside the bridal chamber as Lady Eleanor carefully fastened the ancient silver crown into her dark hair. Unlike the jeweled crowns displayed throughout the palace, this one appeared surprisingly simple, crafted from intertwined silver branches embracing a single crescent moon at its center. The moment the crown rested upon her head, the pendant around her neck glowed softly before settling into a gentle warmth that filled her with unexpected peace. Lady Miriam stepped closer with quiet satisfaction. "The crown recognizes only one heart at a time," she whispered. "For 3 centuries it remained silent." Emma looked at her reflection in the tall mirror. She still saw the same young woman who had grown up inside a humble mountain cottage, yet something deeper had changed. The uncertainty that once clouded her eyes had been replaced by calm determination. Moments later, the massive doors of the royal hall slowly opened. Music filled the palace as Emma entered beside Lady Eleanor, every graceful step echoing across the marble floor. Hundreds of eyes immediately turned toward her. Some reflected admiration, while others revealed confusion as they noticed the unfamiliar silver crown resting upon her head. At the opposite end of the hall stood Rowan, waiting before the ancient moon altar dressed in elegant black ceremonial robes embroidered with silver wools that shimmered beneath the sunlight. When their eyes met, neither smiled immediately. Instead, they shared a quiet understanding born from everything they had discovered together before dawn. As Emma reached the altar, the High Elder raised the royal marriage contract for all to witness. Before he could begin the traditional ceremony, one of the senior council members respectfully stepped forward. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, before this union is confirmed, the council requests clarification regarding the relic discovered beneath the eastern garden. The kingdom deserves certainty before accepting ancient signs that have remained hidden for centuries. A respectful silence settled throughout the hall. Every guest waited for Rowan's response. Instead of answering from beside the altar, Rowan calmly descended the marble steps until he stood beside Emma. His voice remained steady and warm as he addressed both the council and the gathered families. For generations we preserved traditions while forgetting the reasons they were created. This kingdom has always believed that strength alone protects its future. Yet every record we uncovered this morning reminds us that our greatest rulers never stood alone. They stood beside someone worthy of complete trust. The council members exchanged thoughtful glances, unable to dismiss the ancient evidence so easily. Before anyone spoke again, the silver pendant resting against Emma's heart released another gentle wave of light. This time the glow spread beyond the altar, flowing quietly across the marble floor until it reached the royal marriage contract held by the High Elder. The parchment shimmered brilliantly as hidden lines of elegant writing slowly appeared beneath the original agreement. Gasps echoed throughout the hall. The High Elder carefully lowered his eyes and began reading the newly revealed words aloud. This covenant shall never bind two strangers. It shall awaken only when both hearts freely accept the path prepared beneath the moon. The hall became perfectly silent. Emma looked toward Rowan, surprised by the unexpected words. Rowan's expression revealed the same astonishment she felt. Whatever had just appeared upon the contract had not been written by any living hand. Lady Miriam quietly closed her eyes with gratitude, while even the oldest council members lowered their heads in respectful silence. For the first time in centuries, the forgotten promise hidden within Ashford Palace had spoken for itself, and everyone present understood they were no longer witnessing an ordinary royal wedding. They were standing at the beginning of a destiny that no council, no tradition, and no ancient law had ever truly possessed the power to create or prevent. The royal hall remained silent long after the High Elder finished reading the hidden covenant. The words lingered in every heart like the final note of a beautiful melody, impossible to ignore and equally impossible to explain. Sunlight continued pouring through the stained glass windows, illuminating the ancient contract that now carried both the visible agreement of the kingdom and the newly awakened promise beneath the moon. Emma stood beside Rowan, feeling hundreds of eyes upon her, yet for the first time since arriving at Ashford Palace, she no longer felt like an outsider standing inside someone else's world. She simply felt present, exactly where she was meant to be. The High Elder slowly lowered the contract before turning toward the gathered council. His weathered face reflected quiet humility rather than authority. For decades we believed we protected our traditions, he said calmly. Today our traditions have reminded us that they were never ours to control. No one challenged his words. Even the council members who had questioned Emma only moments earlier remained respectfully silent. Lady Miriam stepped forward carrying another weathered volume from the royal archives. She opened it carefully before the assembly, revealing a faded illustration identical to the mural hidden beneath the eastern garden. The first Luna stood beside the first Alpha King wearing the same silver crown and crescent pendant that Emma now carried. Beneath the illustration rested a single sentence written in elegant ancient script with a modern translation added centuries later. When compassion walks beside strength, the kingdom remembers who it truly is. Gentle whispers spread across the hall as noble families leaned closer to study the forgotten page. Many had spent their entire lives memorizing royal history, yet none had ever seen these words. Rowan accepted the ancient book from Lady Miriam before addressing everyone gathered beneath the towering arches. My ancestors were remembered for their victories, he said. Perhaps they should also be remembered for the kindness that allowed those victories to endure. His voice carried no pride, only conviction. He turned toward Emma, extending his hand with quiet sincerity rather than royal ceremony. Emma looked into his steady gray eyes and saw no obligation, no political calculation, and no expectation of perfection. She saw only honesty. With calm confidence, she placed her hand in his. The silver pendant resting against her heart released one final gentle glow, and this time Rowan's ceremonial crest answered with the same warm light. Soft gasps echoed throughout the hall as the twin lights blended together before slowly fading, leaving only peaceful silence behind. The High Elder smiled for the first time that morning. "The covenant has accepted both hearts," he announced warmly. "Let the ceremony continue." Rowan and Emma repeated their vows with simple, heartfelt promises rather than grand declarations. They pledged to lead with wisdom, to listen before judging, to protect the vulnerable, and to remember that true strength could never exist without compassion. When the final blessing concluded, the palace bells rang across the kingdom once again. Outside, citizens waiting beyond the palace gates looked toward the towers as white doves circled gracefully above the snow-covered rooftops. News of the mysterious sign spread faster than the winter wind. Some called it destiny. Others called it hope returning after generations of silence. As Rowan and Emma stepped onto the grand palace balcony together, the gathered crowd below gradually fell quiet. Then, one person began applauding. Another quickly followed. Within moments, the entire courtyard echoed with warm celebration that carried across the frozen gardens and distant mountains. Emma felt tears gathering in her eyes, not because she had become a queen, but because for the first time in her life, she was no longer being measured by where she came from. She was being welcomed for the kindness she had carried all along, and beside her, Rowan realized that the greatest decision he had ever made had not been signing a marriage contract. It had been choosing to trust the quiet voice that had guided him toward the woman destiny had patiently prepared long before either of them understood why. The celebrations continued throughout Ashford Palace until the golden light of afternoon slowly softened into a peaceful winter evening. Music floated through elegant courtyards, families shared warm conversations beneath glowing lanterns, and children laughed as fresh snow drifted gently across the palace gardens. Yet amid the joyful atmosphere, Emma found herself quietly stepping away from the crowded reception hall. She wandered toward the eastern balcony overlooking the frozen valley beyond the palace walls, needing a few moments to breathe after everything that had changed within a single day. The cold air brushed gently across her face as she rested her hands upon the carved stone railing. Far below, she could see villagers returning home with smiles that carried a hope she had never witnessed before. For years the kingdom had admired strength from a distance. Today it had also learned to recognize kindness. Soft footsteps approached behind her. Emma smiled before turning because somehow she already knew who it would be. Rowan joined her beside the balcony without interrupting the peaceful silence. Together they watched the sun slowly disappear behind snow-covered mountains, painting the sky with gentle shades of gold, rose, and violet. "When I was younger," Rowan said quietly, "I believed becoming Alpha King meant carrying every burden alone." Emma glanced toward him. "And now?" Rowan smiled with quiet honesty. "Now I think leadership begins the moment someone realizes they were never meant to walk alone." Emma lowered her eyes thoughtfully. "I spent most of my life believing that if I worked hard enough and stayed kind enough, perhaps one day people would finally accept me." Rowan gently shook his head. "You were accepted today because you never stopped being yourself while everyone else expected you to become someone different." His words settled gently within her heart, carrying more comfort than any grand compliment ever could. Before either of them spoke again, Lady Miriam approached carrying another small wooden box wrapped carefully in soft linen. "There is one final gift," she said warmly. "Every Luna who fulfilled the ancient covenant received this after the ceremony." Emma carefully opened the box and discovered a delicate silver key engraved with the familiar crescent moon. Unlike ordinary keys, this one seemed almost weightless. Lady Miriam pointed toward the distant library tower rising above the palace. "There is a private room hidden above the royal library. Only the Alpha King and Luna may enter together. It protects journals written by every ruler who honored the covenant." Later that evening, Rowan and Emma climbed the winding stone staircase leading toward the quiet tower. The silver key fit perfectly into an ancient lock hidden behind an ordinary bookshelf. As the door slowly opened, warm candlelight revealed a circular room surrounded by beautifully preserved journals resting upon handcrafted wooden shelves. Large windows overlooked the entire kingdom, while a magnificent painted ceiling displayed the phases of the moon surrounded by countless stars. Emma carefully opened the nearest journal. The elegant handwriting belonged to a Luna who had lived centuries earlier. Instead of recording battles or royal ceremonies, every page described ordinary moments. Shared meals. Quiet conversations. Walks through snow-covered gardens. Acts of forgiveness. Decisions made with patience instead of pride. Rowan read over her shoulder before quietly laughing. History remembered crowns, he said. They remembered each other. Emma gently closed the journal, realizing that the greatest legacy was never power alone but the love and compassion that shaped every choice afterward. As they prepared to leave the hidden room, she noticed one final empty journal resting alone upon a polished table beside an ink bottle and untouched feather pen. The cover carried no name, only a single silver crescent. Rowan looked toward Emma with a peaceful smile. It has been waiting for us. Emma reached forward, resting her fingertips upon the untouched cover as moonlight streamed through the tall windows, quietly welcoming the beginning of a story that no prophecy had written in full, because every chapter from this moment forward would be shaped not by destiny alone, but by the choices they would make. Together. The first snowfall of spring arrived almost 1 year later, dusting the rooftops of Ashford Palace with a delicate layer of white that sparkled beneath the morning sun. Seasons had quietly transformed the kingdom, but the greatest changes had never appeared in marble halls or royal banners. They had appeared in the hearts of the people. Villages that had once judged one another by birth now gathered together during seasonal festivals. Young alphas, betas, and omegas trained, studied, and celebrated side by side with growing respect. The royal council had gradually replaced outdated customs with new traditions inspired by the rediscovered journals preserved inside the hidden tower. Rowan and Emma never claimed to have created those changes alone. They simply chose every day to lead with the same compassion that had first brought them together. On the anniversary of their wedding, Emma asked to visit the mountain cottage where she had grown up. Rowan agreed immediately, insisting that no royal ceremony could ever be more important than remembering where their journey had truly begun. Their carriage traveled along the familiar winding roads through snow-covered forests until the small village appeared exactly as Emma remembered, although its welcome felt completely different. This time, no whispers followed her arrival. Instead, neighbors stepped forward carrying flowers, fresh bread, handmade blankets, and warm smiles. Elderly women embraced her with tears of joy, while children eagerly gathered around the royal carriage, fascinated less by the elegant horses than by the gentle queen who knelt to greet every one of them with genuine kindness. Emma's grandmother waited outside the cottage wrapped in the same warm shawl she had worn on the morning Emma had left. The moment they embraced, neither of them needed words. Everything that had seemed impossible only a year earlier had quietly become real. Later that afternoon, Emma and Rowan walked together to the hill overlooking the village where wildflowers had begun pushing through the melting snow. Emma removed the small silver ribbon her grandmother had given her before the journey to Ashford Palace. Though faded with time, it remained carefully preserved inside her cloak. She smiled as she tied it gently around the branch of a young oak tree overlooking the valley. Rowan watched curiously. "A promise?" he asked. Emma nodded softly. "A reminder." She looked across the peaceful landscape stretching toward the distant palace barely visible beyond the mountains. "I want every difficult beginning to remember that it does not decide the ending." Rowan reached for her hand, and together they stood quietly beneath the bright spring sky as a gentle breeze carried the ribbon gracefully through the air. Several weeks later, inside the hidden library tower, Emma finally opened the empty journal waiting beneath the silver crescent. She dipped the feather pen into fresh ink before writing the very first sentence with calm certainty. "We believed we signed a contract, but what truly began that day was the courage to trust what kindness could become." She closed the journal for a moment, smiling as Rowan entered carrying 2 warm cups of tea. He placed one beside her before noticing the fresh words upon the page. That is how you want history to remember us? He asked with quiet amusement. Emma gently shook her head. Not history, she answered. Someone who needs hope. Rowan smiled, understanding completely. Outside the tower windows, evening moonlight bathed Ashford Palace in peaceful silver once again, just as it had on the night everything began. The ancient covenant had fulfilled its purpose, not by creating perfect rulers, but by bringing together two ordinary hearts willing to choose patience over fear, compassion over pride, and trust over certainty. Long after their names became part of legend, people throughout the kingdom would continue telling the story of the quiet Omega who believed she was signing away her future, only to discover that the greatest promises are never written only upon paper. They are written within hearts brave enough to answer when destiny gently knocks.